So tying up our tomato plants is really important if you want to make sure that your plant doesn't get so heavy that it breaks branches off, or it gets so heavy that it starts to lay on the ground. And not only can you have branches or vines, part of these, that break off, but then you've got your fruit that's down on the ground, your tomatoes that are down on the ground. So not only do slugs and other insects have easier access to them and then tend to eat them before we can get to them, but also when you've got your tomato plants that are touching the ground, you have a higher likelihood of disease that is in the soil when you have fungal spores or bacteria spores that just live in the dirt. Well, when you've got a large majority of the plant laying on the dirt, it's much more likely that those are going to transfer and infect the plant than if you have them upright and tied where you've got good airflow and they're just not as in close of contact. So tying up and providing support to our tomatoes is really important. And I'm sure many of you have seen the tomato cages, especially those little round, like circle wire ones that are usually at grocery stores or any type of like gardening center. And when your tomato plants are small, those can work well. But if you are growing a large amount of tomatoes, where we're trying to grow a year's worth of tomatoes to take our family all the way through, so that's anywhere from 20 to 30 plants for our family of 4, that can quickly add up, having to buy that many cages per tomato plant. But the other part that usually we get a major fail with that is when you're growing indeterminate varieties, which means these tomatoes will continue to grow and produce right up until that first killing frost. So at the end of the season, in 3 months from now, you do my math, 2.5 months from now, these will be as tall as I am. And if you live in an area where your gardening season, you don't get your first frost until like November or later in the year, they can get really, really tall. And so those little tiny wire cages only last for the first month or so, and then they actually will just crumple and bend and kind of fall to the ground with the weight of the tomato plant. So not only are they expense, but they usually don't end up working for the long term if you're doing indeterminate varieties. So here, and there's different ways that you can do this. So I'm going to show you the 2 different ways that we do it. So we're starting here in our high tunnel. So this is where if you have tomatoes planted in rows in your garden, doesn't have to be in a high tunnel, you can mimic this either way. So here in our high tunnel, we have our top guide wire. Now I like to use wire because wire doesn't break as easy as string when you're talking about this top guide wire, this top portion that all of the tomato plants are going to be getting tied to within this row. So we have taken it and we actually just drilled holes through our bracing of the wood, and you're going to want to have some type of bracing, and I'm going to tell you how to do it if you're not doing this in a high tunnel, so don't worry. You're going to go overhead starting right at the beginning of the row and the end of the row, but then you are going to need some bracing in between if your row is longer than, say, 3 tomato lengths. So we have simply taken and just drilled a hole here through these inner bracings. So we've got 2 and then the end. So we've got 4 points here. And we just drilled a hole and went straight through because that is going to hold the wire, this board, much better than any other type of anchoring system that I can have here. And it's already here. Now, if you don't have bracing boards in a high tunnel or greenhouse type environment, you can do the same thing, and you can kind of see how we've done this actually over on our raspberries and the blueberries over here. And that is simply by putting 2 posts at the very end of the row. Now we've got metal posts over there, but you can do the same thing with T-posts. So you're going to put your post at the end of the row, and then you're going to run that wire along the top of it. Now, depending on how long that row is and how much weight you have being pulled down on that, you may need to put some additional posts in the center so that that wire has something solid to rest on to help keep it up. So either option. But then and this is where you don't have to use wire on this part. In fact, I wouldn't recommend trying to tie your tomato plant with wire because it's going to cut through the tomato plant as it grows. So twine works great if you've got old baling twine, jute twine, string, anything like that. So when the plant is young, we just come to the main branch. So this tomato, you can see we've just done 1 tying here. And I like to do it where I'm kind of looping this underneath one of a vine that's going out so that it has a natural stopping and resting point. And you're going to want to tie it loosely. And I like to usually do a slip knot. And the reason I want to tie it loosely is because this stem is going to continue to grow as the plant grows. And so I don't want to tie it so tight that as it grows, it actually ends up cutting it off and growing into the twine. So I like to do it loose. And then because this is a little bit slippery, I like to do it right beneath a branch here. So that kind of helps to anchor it in spot. So usually the very first tying that we do on a plant is going to be on the main stem here. And we just go one up and then go ahead and tie that. But as these plants grow, a lot of these larger branches, especially your bottom branches, and I've actually pruned this a couple of times. So this is one of those bottom branches, and I'm going to prune this off. And we've got videos on pruning tomato plants. We'll talk more. You can go and watch those to catch more on that. I'm just going to do a quick job here. But these bottom branches that I've left, you can see this one is just beginning to flower. And then I've got a lot more blossoms up here. So this is quickly going to become loaded with tomatoes, which is amazing and one of our goals. But as these develop into tomatoes, this is going to get very heavy and it's either going to break off or it's going to be laying on the ground and all of those aforementioned issues. So as the tomato starts to grow more and develop more of these side branches that are going to become heavy with fruit, I will come through and I'm going to tie this again, loosely right here at a point where I'm going right underneath this outside branch here. And so I'm just gonna tie this, as I said, a little bit on the loose side. And then I usually just do it in a slip knot. So if I need to loosen this later on, that I can do so pretty easy. So that has a little bit of give there. You can see that's gonna move up and down nicely. And then we're just gonna come right up to our guide wire here. And you could do this one of two ways. So now you can see that's nice and pulled up off the ground. That's going to be great. And I could just tie this directly to the guide wire if I only have one branch like this that I'm lifting up. But when I usually come up to do this is what I kind of call a second tying because it's not to this main stem here, which is the first. I will go up and over. And I'm going to come to this other side branch because same thing is going to happen as this continues to develop. And I've got already blossoms here that are going to become fruit. Again, this is also going to lay down. So I found it easiest because the weight on both sides is going to help to keep these up. And so I just loop this one all the way up and over, and then I'm going to tie this as well. There we go. So I'll simply go through, and then I usually only have to come back through a third time right at the peak of the season when these have grown like another foot or two, and sometimes I'll need to tie up just a few more additional branches. But this works the best for us. It holds all the way throughout the season. I don't have them crumpling over. And as you can probably see, a lot of these spots over here on the other ones that I've already done, this is just twine and string. And I'll just leave them because we end up planting here in the high tunnel. I replant tomatoes in here every year. So for example, this was a string that was done from last year. And you can see this was on a branch when the plant was a lot taller. So I just leave this string until this tomato plant gets high enough. And then it'll be one of the last ones that I end up tying with. So a lot of the times I actually will just reuse the string until it gets too weathered. Sometimes it will break I think I've been able to usually use most of the string for 2 years, usually by the third year, because I don't take it down. It's out here in the elements. It will get a little bit too weak and you won't be able to tie anything to it. So this is a method that works really well. As I said, if you're growing in rows or growing in a greenhouse or high tunnel environment. But there's one other way that we grow tomatoes that also does well and is a little bit, I'm not sure if easier is the word, but has a great natural built-in support system. You just have to do a little bit of helping with the tomatoes. So let's go check that out. So you can see here we are at the farm stay vegetable garden. And so I don't have a high tunnel down here. So instead, we like to grow the tomatoes when we're not in a high tunnel environment using these hog panels. And the reason we like to use these hog panels is because if we enter into a really cool rainy season, which is usually more likely to happen actually in the late spring and early summer here, we joke and say summer doesn't start until July 5th here in the Pacific Northwest because normally it's rainy, like we call June is called January here because it's very much mimicking, it feels like January. It's usually very cold and rainy. That was not the case this year, but historically that's typically the way it goes. So when the tomato plants first go in the ground as starts in May, usually throughout the month of June, we have cold weather issues. And it's the cool rain that can cause blight and makes tomatoes not happy. So we have found that by putting them inside, on the inside of a hog panel like you have here, if you get a section of weather, of days that's going to be really cold and wet, you can put plastic on the outside and you just use like clothespins just to put it on. And then that will keep the rain from being overhead. It doesn't really increase the temperature that much because this part is wide open, but it does protect them from that cool rain where you're more likely to get fungal or things like blight developing. So we put these down here, but the other great thing about using this system is it makes it really easy to trellis your tomatoes. So usually when they are little, and you can see we plant them on the inside and relatively close to this, you only have to tie that main stalk once in most cases when they're growing right along the side of it, because as you can see, it's been started here, but then the branches that are growing out are naturally growing through, up and through, and sometimes I'll come in and just kind of thread them through this myself. So they are naturally growing through because these are large enough for them to get through. They're growing through this, and then they have a natural support system on these wires, which is fabulous. So I actually have to do much less tying of tomatoes when they're planted next to this, close enough that they can thread through. So you can see there's a lot of just natural. Then like here, I've got this branch, which is still supple and little enough that I will do the same thing. I'm just gonna thread it through here, and then it will just continue to grow through like that. So this works really, really well. And if I was in an area that you don't need to grow tomatoes in a high tunnel, then I would just put all of our tomatoes and grow them that way. So you can see I'm coming through here, and I'm just gonna kind of thread some of these. So I'm just kind of almost training them to go through here, which works really well. Now, you have a couple options though, because this is so wide. I've got one row of tomatoes on this side, obviously, then on the other side, I've got some of the tomatoes here too. Now, these ones are a little bit more bushy. So as these grow, because on this side, there's nothing for them to grow through, I probably will go ahead and tie a few of these. So I'm just gonna come out to some of these ones that are really branching out there and are larger, and especially the ones that already have some blossoms starting, because I know those are going to get heavy with fruit first, and that will really cause them to start to go down towards the soil and or break off, which we don't want. All right, so we've got that one. And then the nice thing is I can either go directly overhead like I have to do with this one that's here in the center because it doesn't have any support available, but I can either go directly almost overhead, or I can just take it a little bit more to this side so I can leave more room here for tying up this one. Now again, I could just cut and tie this here, or I can go ahead and take this down to where I see another vine that also needs to be anchored up, and get that one with the same piece. All right, there we go. Hopefully you are going to have a robust harvest of tomatoes, and if you do, you have to make sure that you watch this video so that you learn how to make amazing homemade tomato sauce without all of the excess work that can go into making and canning sauce.